Good evening. Welcome to a capital science lecture, and tonight a capital science documentary. I am Dick Meserve. I'm the president of the Carnegie Institution. And this evening's event is being co-hosted by the Office of Science and Technology of the Embassy of Austria and the American Chemical Society. I would like to especially welcome representatives of our co-hosts, the Ambassador of Austria, Dr. Christian Prost, and Ms. Madeleine Jacobs, the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the American Chemical Society. On May 9th, 1960, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that it had approved the world's first birth control pill, a synthetic blend of steroid hormones that suppress the release of eggs from a woman's ovaries. The pill, as it came to be called, became a symbol of women's rights and generational change, and it spearheaded, for a time, a debate about morals. But the pill was much more than that. It was a triumph for science, and it was also an important milestone in the life of the man we honor tonight, Dr. Carl Djerassi. Dr. Djerassi's work on steroids in the late 1940s at a small laboratory in Mexico City, operated by a company called Syntex, provided the critical technical breakthrough that enabled the pill. Progesterone was known as an essential actor in a woman's reproductive cycle. The Carnegie's Department of Embryology's George Corner, in fact, was among the first to isolate and study this compound. Progesterone is responsible for the suppression of ovulation during certain times of the reproductive cycle, thus serving as a natural contraceptive. But natural progesterone is not viable in oral form. Ingesting the hormone weakens its biological activity. In 1950, Dr. Djerassi was the first who was able to synthesize a progesterone equivalent that was orally active. It was from this synthetic steroid, after extensive biological and clinical studies, that the pill was derived a decade later. In the same year that he synthesized synthetic progesterone, Dr. Djerassi was also the first to successfully synthesize the steroid cortisone, which is today widely used as an anti-inflammatory. Dr. Djerassi went on to make many more contributions, including innovative natural approaches to insect control. Dr. Djerassi was born in Vienna, Austria. He was a teenager when he fled the Nazis with his family and came penniless to America. He graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio and earned his PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He then joined the pharmaceutical company Ciba in New Jersey, where he worked to develop the first commercial antihistamine. After moving to Syntex in Mexico City a few years later, and then to Wayne State University, he eventually settled at Stanford University as a professor of chemistry. At the same time, he maintained his ties to Syntex as his president. He also founded the insect control company Zoocon. Dr. Djerassi is a longtime member of the National Academy of Sciences and other illustrious scientific bodies, and has won many awards. He is among the few to have received both a National Medal of Science for his work in developing synthetic progesterone and the National Medal of Technology for his work in developing methods of insect control. He has won the Wolf Prize in Chemistry from the National Academy of Sciences, the Gold Medal of the American Institute of Chemistry, and the American Chemical Society's highest award, the Priestley Medal. He has also received 24 honorary doctorates. He even has the rare distinction of having his image grace an Austrian postage stamp. He told me last night that he enjoys the thought of the thousands of people who lick the back of his head. Dr. Djerassi retired from Stanford University in 2002. By then, his other life as an author was well underway. He published his first literary work, The Futurist and Other Stories, as well as his first novel, Cantor's Dilemma, in 1989. He then wrote 4 other novels in a genre he describes as science in fiction, before becoming a playwright. His 6 plays have appeared in over a dozen languages and have been performed in theaters worldwide. Dr. Djerassi is also an art collector and an art lover. He established the Djerassi Resident Artist Program near his ranch in Woodside, California. This program, the largest of its kind in the western United States, provides residencies and studio space for artists in the visual arts, literature, music, and choreography in the performing arts. Tonight, we will view the English language premiere of a film about Dr. Djerassi's remarkable life. Much of the film was shot on the grounds of his California ranch, a beautiful setting where art and nature come together in peaceful solitude. This documentary is a very personal and compelling portrait of a fascinating man. In addition to bringing you the celluloid version of Carl Djerassi, we also welcome tonight the real Carl Djerassi. Following the documentary, Dr. Djerassi and Ms. Jacobs from the American Chemical Society will come up on stage for a conversation. In the meantime, we hope you enjoy the film.
It's my great pleasure tonight to have a conversation with Carl and to leave enough time for some of you to ask Carl some questions too. So for full disclosure, Carl has not heard any of these questions, and I will not ask you about the birth control pill.
Thank you.
But after seeing this wonderful film, I think we're all very jealous of you. You're an intellectual polygamist, a Renaissance man, really an amazing person. And so my question is, why does an 87-year-old man, albeit one who looks much younger and is definitely very sexy.
Flattery will get you everywhere with me. I want to tell you that.
Why are you still a 24/7 workaholic?
You know, you want a very quick question to, a quick answer to probably the most complicated question you could ask. I would say it is to fight, not to fight, to deal with loneliness. And that's not a recent one. I think it's probably a phenomenon I was not quite aware of. Initially, as a chemist, you don't quite notice it. As an ambitious chemist like myself, who was working all the time. But later on, and the term polygamist, which people usually use in a pejorative context, I use in a very positive one. I really think polygamist means not you have many wives, but you love them all equally. But at the same time, you are occupied with different things. And I did this even in my own chemistry. I did work at the same time on many different problems, not just on one. But at this point right now, writing plays, writing fiction, being involved in presentations, in meetings, still teaching now, interdisciplinary seminar on between chemist and drama. They don't have that. That really keeps me going. There's absolutely no question. For me, the word, unfortunately, it's a form of machismo. Vacation is a dirty word for me. But I'm learning now that I'm stupid. And so late in life, I actually spent 4 days last week in Hawaii.
Wow.
So, you see, I'm learning. But it's coping. It's the only way I managed to cope with the death of my wife. During the last 3 years of her life, when she coped with it by immersing herself in life. I wrote a book during that time. It's outside, 4 Jews on Parnassus, which is the best thing I've ever written, probably the best thing I ever will write. And if one looked at it, it doesn't deal with scientists, and yet there are an enormous number of biographical nuances in there. And I also would say, it's important to make that point, I write because it's a form of autopsychoanalysis for me. I've written 3 autobiographies. One of them, Jeff Seaman is here in the audience, who was responsible for the first one. Second one was for the general public. Third one was to bring people up to date as they were interested. I'm not quite sure whether they were. But in autobiographies, you don't really tell the real truth. You're too embarrassed, too ashamed, or you want to embellish life. It is only in fiction that you really can tell the real truth, at least I can, and I hide myself in many different figures, including many women.
Well, let me ask you about 4 Jews on Parnassus, which is, if you haven't bought this book, Carl will be signing them here after the presentation. This is a fascinating book. It's actually an amazing book, and as someone who actually has read, I think, almost everything you've written, I found this very exciting and very unusual for the things that you've written. What prompted you to write this as a dialogue? For those of you who don't know what this is about, Carl will tell you a little bit, but it's quite unusual.
Well, it's written totally dialogic, even though it's not a play at all. You know, people think if you write something dialogic, it's a play. It doesn't have the structure of a play. I did an enormous amount of research in here for this, about 4 intellectual giants, European giants, of which at least one everyone here knows would be Arnold Schoenberg. And there's a CD in there of some very rare music, including some music that was composed for me for this particular book. There's some wonderful pictures in there as well. There's a lot about Paul Klee in there. And what I really wanted to write late in life, I wanted to get to understand what it means to be a Jew. Religiously, that's clear, but I'm not religious, neither Jewish nor any other religion. Yet I'm called a Jew, and I name myself that, and I want to know what that means. These 4 people are 4 very different ones. Walter Benjamin, who never knew whether he was a German Jew or a Jewish German. Very big difference. Theodor Adorno, who didn't have a Jewish mother and thought he was Catholic, until the Nazis discovered, of course, his father was Jewish and called him a Jew. Gershom Scholem, who was a Jewish Zionist from a very German family, and finally Schoenberg, an Austrian Jew, who decided to convert because he thought it would help him professionally, which it didn't, and then he reconverted. Well, I put all kinds of things in there. But then I also wrote about their wives. These were world-famous people. People don't really address who their wives were, and they were all intelligent wives, well-educated. Adorno's wife was a PhD in chemistry. And really wrote about this. But I wanted to do this in a humanizing style, and because as a scientist, I'm not permitted to use dialogue in my written discourse, nor would I permit myself to do it. That stopped by the time of Galileo, who still wrote dialogically. I wanted to really write something in dialogic style, and say that almost reintroduce this as a literary genre. It's the best book I've written, no question. But then I became so interested in that theme because people open this book and say, it's just a play, and close it, don't even want to read it. And then I took these people and decided to write a play about them, including some of them, and in particular Hannah Arendt. And that you'll see outside, because today is the first day in which the book appeared. It officially only comes out the end of this month. And I think it's a terrific play. And it is dialogically written, but I'm a great believer that plays can also be read. There would be very interesting literature. So here I have something, a book, that seems to be a play, but is not a play, and then I have a play, seems to be a play, but is also a book. And I'm really very proud of this division, this difference as well as similarity. And I put a lot of it about myself in there. For instance, the play, they arrived on this called Foreplay. It's really about the concept of jealousy. What does jealousy mean, both professionally and personally? And also a recurring theme of mine, the border between erotica and pornography. Pornography is not an absolute word, neither is erotica. It means something different in different people, and it even changes in your life. And I thought that I've presented it in an intellectually challenging and yet amusing way. So I'm quite proud of this. So that's the direction which I'm going. I've now jumped back and I'm writing now a play called Insufficiency, actually about a chemist who doesn't get tenure. And it's both an amusing play of real serious problems nowadays in academia, what it means to get tenure and why we are in this really rat race in a certain way, but presented to a general audience disguised as a play, because I really want to teach people something about things that they are not aware of or perhaps not even interested. So I said, let me amuse you, seduce you, smuggle something into your mind in the guise of fiction of a play, and when you're finished, you actually learn something else from Djerassi that you really didn't know before, and it'll stick.
Well, thank you for that great segue, because you often refer to yourself as an intellectual smuggler, and you told me that that is not illegal. So what do you actually mean by the term intellectual smuggler, and why have you taken up this profession?
Because, we research scientists don't spend much time with the public. Neither did I, because we don't get any brownie points for that. Well, I learned that this is an enormous mistake. Usually people learn this late in life when they can afford to do this. They wouldn't get tenure, they did it earlier. But instead of doing it by writing standard articles or giving standard lectures, I really thought that I would like to touch a public which I wouldn't otherwise touch. Right here, you came presumably because you're interested either in me or in science or something like this. But I would really like to touch the people who did not come to this here. And do it, hopefully people that may read fiction, that may go to a theater or something in an unconventional way, and yet in the end talk about science. But instead of talking mostly about science, namely what we do, because there are plenty of very good journalists that do this, there are probably some, in fact, and definitely some actually sitting in the audience, I want to say how we do it. Because we really have a tribal culture, which even most of the scientists don't really understand or even study, because we don't learn it in courses, in lectures, in books, how to become a scientist. We learn it through intellectual osmosis. And one day we behave like our models, whether it's the mentors or colleagues around ourselves. And we're not really introspective, and we really don't really think about the idiosyncratic characteristics of our life, which are both very positive and also very negative. For instance, science, the most collegial of all enterprises, at the same time the most brutally competitive one, with ambition to be first. Why does it make any difference to be first? And to the public, it doesn't make any difference who did the first oral contraceptive. They want to know whether it works or it doesn't work, whether it harms them or benefits them. They're not interested in anything else. But to the scientists, that is important. And that, incidentally, is the poisonous aspect of what I talked about in the film, rather than the negative one, rather than the positive and negative one. And what I really want to do is talk about the behavior, because I've also late in my life started to think about the idiosyncratic aspect of my own behavior, which is typical. Maybe somewhat extreme, but typical of other people. Remember, the film started with Gilbert Stork and myself, my oldest friend, and Jerry Meinwald, who talked about him as, he is this very modest man, and he is this very ambitious man. Well, this is frankly bullshit, to put it very bluntly. Gilbert is as ambitious as I am, but like many chemists and scientists, they pretend not to be. And this is supposed to be disguised. I'm brutally honest, but there's really a fundamental difference. Now, I pride myself at my honesty, but it's also a form of masochism, there's absolutely no question. So what I'm writing about in this smuggling thing is really a collective mea culpa. It isn't just Carl Djerassi talking about some of the negative, I also talk about many of the positive aspects. And I particularly talk in every one about women in science, because I'm very much interested in how women finally move into one of the most male-dominated disciplines, religion and science. The two most that were only established by men, that only have hormone, testosterone. And what happens if estrogens are now being introduced in the climate? Does it simply mean that those women who really make it simply produce more testosterone, or do they bring some estrogen into the intellectual climate? And that is very important. And I do this in a smuggling sort of way. But you'll actually find me, if you really knew something about me, in these novels and so on, as I'm partly in the women rather than the men. I don't give you the Rosetta Stone to Carl Djerassi, so you don't know where I am in these novels, what I confess and admit to that I wouldn't do openly, but I do it hidden, and I enjoy that. Absolutely no question. And I particularly enjoy playwriting because I find that practically no scientists, chemists write plays, where there are quite a number of physicians who write plays. And you might ask why. And I think it's because we, as chemists, deal with molecules. Physicians deal with human beings. Plays don't deal with molecules, they deal with human beings and human behavior. And we as scientists, and particularly also as chemists, need to learn more about, and I needed to learn that late in life, about being humans rather than just scientists.
Carl, I think right now we're going to take some questions from the audience, and I have one question that I'll ask you at the very end. But this is an opportunity for anyone. There are microphones there, or if you just have a loud voice, I'll look out there and raise your hand. There we go. We have a question right here.
My voice is loud enough. You had said that you wanted to write plays because you wanted to offer some information to people. Is this information all in a little pile and you're gradually introducing it, or does it come to you like this week I'll do this information? And you don't know what the next information you want to convey is. It comes later. Or is it collected, or is it just comes in bits?
Yeah, I understand your question. But you're really, in a way, asking my mode of writing. You know, strange enough, and I really consider myself a writer. That's my profession. Now, not a chemist. I used to be a chemist. But I don't write the way you imagine a scientist would write. And in fact, the way maybe half the authors write, namely the first particular playwrights. They actually map out what they want to write about. They think about who the characters are, what they're going to do, make themselves notes about this, even know the end, the entire plot, and then start writing. I don't do that. I'm an extremely intuitive writer. I start with something that occurred to me, that I observed, that I remembered, and then I let it happen. And I start writing. I never know the end. Never knew the end of my short stories or my novels, even my plays. And that was actually very exciting. And what is really happening to me, or I pretend that it is happening, I imagine that it is, that these people whom I really have invented take me over. They introduce me to others. They suddenly decide to do certain things that I really didn't think they ought to do, or that they even had the temerity to do it. And then I follow them. They seduce me. And I do this and that, and suddenly I said, my God, this would really be quite an end. And I go into that ending. But with plays, and that is the great, the play's never finished. Particularly when the luck that it also gets performed, the mine have been performed in many different countries. I change it almost for each new staging with a new director and so on, in collaboration, obviously, with them. So you can keep on changing something. It becomes a complete dynamic thing, which a novel or book never does, because once it comes out, it's set in stone. You can do nothing about this. So it's that combination and that intuitive business, but of course it really isn't intuitive. And that's why I call it autopsychoanalysis. It comes from me, it doesn't come from someone else. I just imagine, or I pretend, or even I believe that these people tell me things I didn't know. But of course they come from a subconscious of mine that I didn't know otherwise. And this is why I use the word autopsychoanalysis. In fact, I'm going to give a talk next month at the Freud Institute in Vienna, of all things, and they asked me to talk, and what is my title? Does autopsychoanalysis have to be automythology? Now, that's actually a complicated title, but in the end does it really mean that autopsychoanalysis is always just imagination? Because, of course, all psychoanalysts will tell you need an analyst and an analysant in order to have transference and so on. I tell them that's nonsense. If you write fiction in the way that I do and hide autobiographical things in there, deliberately or inadvertently, you really learn something about the person. In that case, I learned something about myself in the process of writing. And that's also the perfect cure for loneliness, let's say, because you're in fact not alone. When you write, you're surrounded by people. It's people that you've admittedly invented, but they're around and they're really very real. And in plays, of course, even better because you talk to them all the time.
Good question. Right over here. Okay, in the back, and then we'll come down front.
Could you get to that microphone? I can't quite hear the acoustics. I think it's hopefully better. Well, of course, I've got a microphone.
Yeah, if you have a question, if you would line up at the mic, it would be great.
Okay, perhaps in a similar vein to the last question, you suggested that a scientist can explain complicated issues through fiction. And that's very important these days with the general perception of misunderstanding of science in the public. So is there one societal issue at the moment that you would identify that a chemist particularly should help to explain to the general public?
Well, but I tell you, you call it scientific issues, and I said that is scientific issues again are more what are we doing rather than how we're doing it. But the scientific issue, because I do consider it a scientific one, which is the substance of a lot of my talks, a number of my plays, and so on, is really a separation of sex and reproduction. And people are not willing to accept this. Many people find it threatening and so on. In fact, we're doing it all the time. And we're doing it all the time, obviously, because nowadays, particularly in Europe, Austria, let's take that country because I wrote much of it there. The average family is 1.5 children. Well, they have 1.5 times sexual intercourse or 5 times or 10 times. They have hundreds of times before or afterwards. The two things are almost completely separate. But that has enormous implications with respect to the power relationship between men and women, which in the context of sex and reproduction was all men were here, women were there. We men initiated, decided everything else. Yet biologically, it's exactly the other way around. And that's starting to change because of scientific developments. And it is not contraception. Contraception was the leitmotif in reproduction during the last 50 years. For the next 50 years or longer, it will be conception and infection. But particular contraception versus conception is an extremely interesting model and something that lends itself to all kinds of things, sociological things, as I said, the power relation of men and women, all the way to science and of course, the impact of genomics and genetic selection and selection even of sex and reproduction and so on. And these, I think, are the themes that happen to interest me, and they're burning ones.
Thank you.
Another question.
First, let me thank you for being brutally honest about your own life and your struggles. As I think about your life, it's painful to me to reflect on what it means to lose a homeland. So I'm asking, did you also lose family? Were there no grandparents or uncles or aunts or others? Did you lose them as well?
No.
And you did not?
No, it's very important if you think losing in the context of leaving, of having to flee as a refugee, as a Jewish refugee. I fled very early, as you saw in there, because my father came already in July. The Anschluss was in March or April. And we left immediately. There really horrible things starting with Kristallnacht, let's say in November of that year, 38, and then, of course, there were much more horrible things afterwards, by which time I had gone. But I have an extremely small family. I'm an only child, and I have, well, right now my entire family is sitting right here, my son and grandson right here in this room. I have a stepdaughter. I have no other relatives. And so, no, it was not that loss. And I have to tell you right away, as a single child, an only child, I was a very happy only child. I'm in favor of, well, almost, of having only children. You get all the attention that you'd like, and then some. But the loneliness was a different loneliness, and part of it is probably my fault. But I think the death, of your daughter, of a child, is of course the most horrible thing. And then the death of your spouse, particularly in my case, where it was a very much younger spouse, is of course the two completely unexpected deaths. And to cope with death under these circumstances is very difficult. And I found that the one way I could do it is drowning myself in work, but in intellectual work, not in keeping busy just for the sake of being busy, but really doing something where almost every synapse and every neuron needs to be used, and you have none left for feeling sorry for yourself. And that is, I think it's a damn good therapy.
Thank you. And you've answered the other questions I had, which were about siblings and about whether you were blessed with grandchildren. I'm jealous because I haven't been yet.
Over here. One more question.
And can you hear me okay? I'm kind of short.
I beg your pardon?
Whatever. But anyway, promise me you'll take this question more from an intellectual, objective standpoint rather than a personal one, because I'm not trying to pry, per se, okay? No, honestly. I mean, I'm not on camera or anything, I know that, or YouTube or whatever, but it's, okay. What advice would you give someone, and I'm not trying to personalize it, because I might not be talking about myself, about me, but say somebody is, 40-ish, and they've tried all their lives, they've exposed themselves to a lot of opportunities, been a nice person, more or less, but really haven't had much luck in terms of relationships. Now, say you've said you were, I missed the beginning of it, but about this polygamy, and for the women that you met and quote-unquote fell in love with, were they trying, were they looking for someone Did it happen by accident? Did you have something in common intellectually? Do you understand the question? Or?
Oh, I know.
Thank you. That's a great question.
I have to tell you honestly.
But
I not
again, it's
only
meant to be
understand it, I
objective,
also
not
lived
to-
it. Yes. But you want an answer for that? I mean, the only way I'd be prepared to answer this is privately with you.
Is what?
No, I mean it. I mean it really. You're asking a very personal question, personal with respect to you particularly, but in a way, if you want an honest answer, you'd get a personal answer from me.
I said from a more advisory standpoint.
Well,
Interesting.
the strange thing, you're not the first person who has asked me that. And I take it seriously. I don't take it trivially. And it's for that reason that I really would only be prepared to answer such a question tete-a-tete, I mean just to one person, not in front of everyone. In particular because I wouldn't even have the temerity to give you advice until I had a little bit of an impression of you. Unfortunately, the light is such I don't even know what you look like, which is probably okay.
But as I said, it may not be about me.
I mean,
All
in
right.
the context of the
Thank
question.
you very much. Carl has made you a very generous offer to talk to you tete-a-tete. So
If she comes with a book in her hand, then I'll sign it for her.
Buy his book, Four Jews and Parnassus, and he'll give you some time. We are at the end of our wonderful evening. I have one last question to ask you. I want to thank everybody for being so great. And there will be a book signing here for about 10 minutes after this. The last question, Carl, is that in many of your books and plays, a leitmotif is people's fascination with how they will be perceived, what their reputation will be after they have died. In fact, that was the major theme of one of my favorite novels that you wrote, Mark's Deceased. So what do you think, what do you hope people will say about you after you've shuffled off this mortal coil 30, 40 years from now?
That it didn't do very much harm.
Thank you.
That was short. Short. All right, I'll go over to this table here.
Carl and Madeleine have really provided us with a fascinating evening, and we've had a wonderful documentary to view as well. I'd like to thank you again for all you've done for us this evening. And let me thank the Austrian Embassy and the American Chemical Society for joining with us and providing us this evening. And we're now adjourned.